Hello class, my name is Joanna Tebow. I wanted to give you a brief presentation about my course project that I did for the class Environmental Economics and Markets. I chose something regionally occurring here in Germany. I do live here with my husband. We are going to be moving back soon, but right now we live in Germany. Finding a subject was a little bit more challenging than I expected, but I chose to do it on a controversial issue happening in Bavaria with regard to a proposed new high voltage transmission line. The reason that the transmission line is being proposed is because after the 2011 Fukushima incident, the German government decided to remove and shut down all of its nuclear power plants. To replace the power, the 22% power that's provided to the country through this nuclear power, they are proposing to replace it with all renewable resources. In fact, they have a lofty goal of a 80% all renewable power production by the year 2050. The issue has arisen because they need to bring the green power from the northern part of Germany to the southern parts and industrial parts of Bavaria. This is an issue because down in Bavaria they do have some solar, but they don't have much, if any, wind power, and that's because, for the same reason they're opposing the transmission line, they do not like the visual effects that come from the wind power. So the local folks here in Bavaria do not want this project to be implemented. The local externalities would essentially be the visual impacts, the electromagnetic field concerns that people have with regard to health and safety, some wildlife issues. The more prevalent issue, of course, is the visual resources. And then on the positive side, you have more system reliability, less congestion on the line, and you technically will have a greener network. So looking at that from a global perspective, really the benefits can be quite large, because if Germany goes to a primarily renewable and green production for its energy, then its carbon footprint would go down. The negative externalities on a global level would be related to the mining for the copper or the aluminum that goes into the transmission towers. The different methods that I proposed, the framework that I proposed, was to use a timeline that would follow the Energiewende, so through 2050, which would be about a 35-year or so timeline with a discount rate of approximately 3%, so that it stays just below what a firm would use. And then, of course, also the baseline would be as if the transmission line were not built at all. The policy would be approving the right-of-way. The primary resource considered here is the public good of being able to have an unaltered landscape. Here in Germany, they refer to any effects to the scenic vista as a landscape. They don't call it aesthetics or visual resources. They would refer to it as landscapes. They do have a law here that's called the Landschafts. I'm not even going to try it. They call it the LPB, and it's very similar actually to the way we use NEPA. It's a forced planning process that makes impacts be reviewed for different proposals. And it is quite strict when it comes to landscape analysis. Significant impacts to landscape is not generally tolerated. So they force projects to avoid, to all costs, basically, doing that and having any effects to the landscape. The different proposals that I would use for the cost-benefit analysis are the hedonic price method to analyze any impacts to real estate that's near the transmission line, the travel cost method, which would survey folks that use this area for recreational purposes, how much they would spend to come to this area. And then finally, the contingent valuation method would also be used to calculate the non-use values when people's choices are not evident in their reactions to environmental change. This is a good example of how you can use that, because trying to put a value on a landscape or visual resources or an impact to that is quite different. I would also propose using a willingness to accept type of contingent valuation survey, because I think that it's difficult to say how much you would pay for the public good of a visual resource or a landscape. So I think it would be more appropriate to use, how much would you be willing to accept in that. You can also use that as well for the electromagnetic fields. You would take these different calculations from the surveys, give them a monetary value. They can be multiplied together and determine environmental benefit of the unaltered visual resources or the benefit of more reliable electric grids. For my final analysis, I looked at this as a public good, which would be, as I define it, an exclusive right to enjoy the scenic vista and unscarred landscape. You'll have visual effects from transmission lines, I think speaks for itself. We all know that they're there. Not only are they big behemoths that cross the landscape, but you have to cut down trees. So if they go through forests, it creates scars. You have to create access roads. Saying that you can avoid landscape impacts to do a project such as this one is just not feasible. You are going to have an impact. The Germans don't use any standard or official methods for evaluating these types of impacts. It's a unique challenge when you have a linear project because you cross so many different landscapes. In the United States, we have quite a few federal agencies that have different standards that are used and accepted. They're all very similar. One, for example, is called a Scenic Quality Assessment. It takes descriptive ranking systems and uses information received from these ranking systems from local citizens that have been surveyed. It lays the information onto a GIS so that you can actually look at a map and see where all the different areas are. And you would look at where your project would be impacting those areas to determine the significance. BLM also has been using something since the 1980s called the Visual Resource Management Guidelines. Many firms are very accustomed to this because it's been used so heavily, and it works almost exactly the same way. They give visual resource management classifications to these areas. The different economic considerations, as we discuss in our book, you would look at the marginal damage costs against the marginal abatement costs. You would determine that it's slightly completely unavoidable to not have the impacts occur, potentially significant, maybe not so much. Maybe it's altering the viewpoint, but maybe you could reduce the significance of that impact somehow, changing the location of it, maybe determining that it's worth the money to go underground in certain locations. Highly unlikely, but that is also possible as well. My policy recommendation for this was that the need for the project and the positive externalities that would occur from having a reliable system that they, quite frankly, need, especially since they're not willing to build any wind power in this area, far offsets any of the potentially significant impacts. We might be adverse to these, but I think through the public process, through the LPB analysis process, they will determine that there are ways to avoid these impacts. I really wish that we, through this class, had time to actually do the surveys that we propose, because I believe that it would be fantastic to know what people really thought of this, and what the government is really going to end up doing is going to be incredibly interesting to me. I have thoroughly enjoyed this class and working with all of you. I hope that you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.